Hey guys, Matt here. Welcome to Habakkuk. This video is going to give us a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at, what we're going to be dealing with as we go through this book of the Old Testament. Now, if you don't already know, it's nestled right before the New Testament in what is known as the Minor Prophets. Now, to just kind of refresh our mind, a prophet is someone who often receives something from God and speaks it to somebody else. Now, Habakkuk is really interesting because he doesn't speak it to anyone specifically. However, God does command him to write down this vision that he's seeing so that we can have it and that it can be part of the scripture which God has put together for his people so that they might know him better. So going back to the book of Habakkuk, not the man, going to the book. We know that the format of this is a back and forth between God and Habakkuk. Habakkuk starts out by making what is known as a lament or an appeal to God based on who God is. Now, this is something that we do a lot as well. And so there are going to be times when it's easy to read ourselves into the situation of Habakkuk. We're going to relate to him because he asks the questions that we do. He says, God, why is evil happening? Why does it look like the bad guys are winning and the good guys are losing? If you're God, why are these things happening? We're going to really dig in and learn more about that. But specifically, Habakkuk is looking at his time. Now, he wrote, it's believed, around 640 BC to 615. So what had happened previously is that the nation, or the empire of Assyria, had come in and had conquered Israel. They had come in. Now, there will be a graphic, hopefully, if I can make it happen. But Israel was the northern kingdom. So they came, they swooped down, and they pulled Israel out, and they took them as exiles from their nation and sent other people to live in the land that God had promised them. Now, God had sent prophets before and had asked and commanded people to return to him, but they did not listen. So God was using this to take his people away and to transform them and call them to himself. As Habakkuk is looking around, he sees something even more terrible starting to arise. It's the Chaldeans, or what we call the Babylonians, are beginning to grow in power. They have yet to conquer Assyria, but they will. And then after Assyria, they come down just like Assyria, and they take the nation of Judah, the southern kingdom, and they exile them as well. This was, again, to fulfill judgment that God was calling on his people. So that is what Habakkuk is seeing. He's seeing this evil start to arise. It looks like the evil is winning and the good is losing. But what's really important to see throughout this book of Habakkuk is how God is using these moments, and he's using Habakkuk's lament and his questions, which are good and right, asking God why these things are happening. God takes this and he is using it to reorient his relationship with us. As Habakkuk is speaking to God, he assumes that he's here, right? And he's saying to God, who he thinks is here. And he's saying, God, why are these things happening? Aren't you God? Aren't you supposed to be doing these things? But by doing so, Habakkuk doesn't realize that he's putting himself on the same level as God. So gently, God works throughout this book to reorient the relationship and saying that even though he is God, we are in the care of his hands. So we see throughout this book the questions that Habakkuk poses, God answers. There's another set of questions. God answers again, this time in a longer form, and then Habakkuk's response. Now, thankfully, we get to look at Habakkuk as a wonderful example of how God is transforming us and calling us back to himself. God speaks of a time when men will live by faith, and that will be their source. Now remember Ephesians 2:8, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith, right? God is speaking of the coming of Jesus, that eternal hope that will help us and guide us and make us new. And that's through the life, death, resurrection of Christ. Now we get something that Habakkuk doesn't. Habakkuk didn't get to live with this hope. He knew of a coming day of a Messiah, as others had prophesied about as well. But we get to live in the reality of that. So even as we ask questions, God is calling us back to himself to reorient how we think, how we live, and ultimately to give him the glory. And we're going to see that throughout this book. I would really encourage you guys to read it. You could probably read it in under 5 minutes. It's 3 chapters long. We're going to be going and we're going to explore this, and I'm really looking forward to it, and can't wait to do it with you guys too.